Hey everybody, I don't know about you, but as you've watched out over the world, the war in Russia and Ukraine is not just isolated to Eastern Europe. It's spread all over the world, and you can see it in market instabilities. You can see it here. People who do not think that that war is affecting you, all you got to do is look at gas prices. You look at your food prices. You see the global change that has happened. But you know something that's also affected investments as well. And I've said all along, legacy precious metals is your navigator. They're the ones that see you through to get to the next level. The good news about this is even with market volatility, market instability, you've got options. And gold prices are rising as investors turn to gold. And gold presents a hedge against this inflation and that protects you against the weakening dollar, which we are seeing. Legacy Precious Metals is the only company I trust to deal with gold and silver and the other precious metals. You need this investment. You need this as part of your portfolio to keep you buffered from what we're seeing in the world, war and volatility in the market. This is where you need to be. Call Legacy Precious Metals today. Be proactive about this. Get on board with it. Call them at 866-528-1903, 866-528-1903, or you can download their free investor's guide at legacypminvestments.com. legacypminvestments.com, your navigator in a volatile world of investments.
Do you want to listen to a podcast?
By who?
Georgia GOP Congressman Doug Collins.
How is it?
The greatest thing I have ever heard in my whole life.
I could not believe my ears.
In this house, wherever the rules are disregarded, chaos and mob rule. It has been said today, where is bravery? I'll tell you where bravery is found and courage is found. It's found in this minority who has lived through the last year of nothing but rules being broken, people being put down, questions not being answered, and this majority say, be damned with anything else. We're going to impeach and do whatever we want to do. Why? Because we won an election. I guarantee you, one day you'll be back in the minority and it ain't gonna be that fun.
Hey everybody, it's Doug Collins. Welcome back to the Doug Collins Podcast. Glad you're here today. And again, as I have been sharing recently, we're a little over 6 months in. We're happy that you have tuned in wherever you get your podcast. And I'm asking for your help. I need you to not only go to where you get your podcast, there's a share link on wherever you get your podcast. You can share this podcast with other folks. I would like, if you've listened to this podcast and you've gotten some value out of it, I would love for you to share it with 5 of your friends. Just take a quick minute, share it with 5 people. I would be gracious, greatly appreciated that you could share what we're doing here on the Doug Collins Podcast with others as we continue to grow and outreach our message. It's amazing how many of you have reached out. I want you to continue to reach out through the DougCollinsPodcast.com, DougCollinsPodcast.com. You can send me an email. You can leave comments. You can see other things from our advertisers out there. We got, Legacy Precious Metals, My Pillow. There's, so many folks out there that help this podcast along. You can be a part of doing that as well, and we just appreciate you being a part. Now, let's get into the podcast. The recent elections on Tuesday's primaries, we had it all over this past week in 7 states, Mississippi included, California, South Dakota, others. The big results out of that I want to share with you, are not that surprising. Incumbents across the country are winning, and they're winning in fairly record numbers. And we saw that in Georgia. We've seen it in other places, and even some of those that had thought going in that might have a problem. Dusty Johnson up in South Dakota, who voted for the January 6th Commission, incurred the wrath of former President Trump and others who voted for that, won with 59%. Kristi Noem, the great governor of South Dakota, she just blew it out. She won her primary, looking probably to also win the general election up there easily as well. We did see some interesting results, though, in Mississippi. We had 2 sitting congressmen, both get put into runoffs. One, Michael Guest down there, was one who also voted for that January 6th Commission. He actually is in a position to lose that seat, possibly in the runoff here in about 3 weeks. He was outpolled by a upstart conservative who is running that race. We'll see what happens as far as endorsements coming through in that seat. But also the one that was most interesting to me was Steve Palazzo's race down in South Mississippi. Palazzo's been in 6 terms now, representing the Biloxi southern coast of Mississippi. And he only got 31% of the vote in his race against 3 or 4 other folks. And Sheriff Ezel down there is at 25%. He was in second place. There's a runoff going to be happening now. My understanding is, just coming out of this, that the grouping down there has gotten around Ezel, the other candidates who were in the race, some other elected officials that have grouped around Ezel, and then that is going to be an interesting race. And if that happens, then you could conceivably see two incumbents go down in Mississippi. And that's just an unusual event. Here in Georgia, I mean, I think the rate of when you looked at incumbents from the governor's races on down in primaries, it was less than 1 or 2 seats when you looked at it from state house, state Senate races, and even and you saw none on a statewide level. In fact, you even see Brad Raffensperger win without a runoff, and most people didn't think that was going to be possible. So to get you just a sense of where elections are going, and that brings us to a discussion of one that I am very happy about. My passion here on this podcast for criminal justice reform and actually doing things that matter when it comes to dealing with those in our criminal justice system, how we prosecute cases, how they're defended, how we then help people either through the criminal justice system, through our incarceration, or through other ways of accountability courts, such as DUI courts, drug courts, veterans courts, family courts, things that keep people productive in their society while paying for their crimes. Well, what we're seeing right now is in California, and if you've not watched California over the last year, California has been just inundated with crime, with violence, with people leaving. I mean, it's just become a problem. When Atlantic Magazine does an article on the city of San Francisco, basically saying it's one of the worst cities in the world for crime, and really taking a axe to San Francisco, if you would, that there's a problem. As we look at what we're going through, one of the races out there that caught my attention, and we've talked about this a little bit, so I wanted to give you an update. Over the past couple election cycles, George Soros has been putting money into DA races, district attorney races in many large cities. We've seen this with Fox in Chicago. We've seen it in St. Louis. We've seen it in San Francisco. We've seen it definitely in Los Angeles. We've seen it in other places. And when we talk about this, these are down ticket races that most people don't realize. DA's races are typically even having a smaller pool to pull from. In other words, there are only attorneys that run for these seats. So your pool is not just anybody who wants to run it. They have to be an attorney. They have to be a practicing attorney in these jurisdictions. And so these races typically don't get a lot of attention. As we've talked about before, that is why I'm so passionate about everybody getting out and learning about all the races that are on your ballot. Don't just show up and vote in the races that you've heard about. Don't just show up and vote for a Senate race, or don't just show up and vote for a governor's race. It matters what is on down that ticket. It matters what is happening in these other races. And I want you to be aware of that, so that as you grow in not only your voter knowledge, but you also are able to make an impact. Because what happens is in these lower races, what you'll see sometimes, and it's what we saw with Soros, is he would inject this money and people would get elected with radical views, many times very different from the communities in which they serve. Well, as the old Star Wars analogy is coming back, the Empire Strikes Back. Chesa Boudin in San Francisco, the DA out there, has been recalled. And in being recalled, he has finally, after only now think about this, he's only been in office since for a little over a year and a half. I mean, he's not been in office very long and has already been recalled. And during that time, the crime rates in San Francisco have just skyrocketed. Now, he was elected, and by the way, this was not a close recall election. It was 61% of the folks in San Francisco voted to recall this absolute disaster of a district attorney, because what they saw in the streets of San Francisco, what they saw that was happening in their own communities, and they were tired of it. They were tired of seeing stores broken into. They were tired of seeing crime rise. Now, understand something. What I want you to understand is that here is what this DA was elected upon. And it played to a very left base, and they did it all under what would be described or under the guise of real criminal justice reform. And it couldn't be anything further from the truth. This is a fraud. This is not real criminal justice reform. He was elected on eliminating cash bail. He was elected on that he would not prosecute some crimes, especially lifestyle crimes, as he would call them. He would not just prosecute the people that were being brought to it, the investigations that were not happening. And the results, and here's the interesting part of this results. the results were the murder rates, the violent crime rates, the burglary rates, the shoplifting rates, open drug sales were all present in San Francisco, and they were growing. And now this is also at a time in which police were under attack, and you see people that are not safe. You see San Francisco being overrun by homelessness. You were seeing, descriptions of San Francisco in liberal publications basically saying they would go through, they would see tent cities everywhere. They would see people in homelessness. They would see, drugs were just out in the open, as the open air market, as it's called. You would even see, the sanitation in the city was all, you'd see human excrement and others on the ground in San Francisco. This was all the while we're in this grand experiment of a DA who was choosing not to prosecute cases. What bothered me the most, and why I'm spending some time on this and why I'm celebrating the recall of the DA in San Francisco, is that it took events outside of those who are being harmed the most. Now remember, liberals will always talk about that we're here for the underprivileged, we're here for the poor, we're here for those communities that have been left behind, we're here for those that don't have a voice. Well, they're here only in name only to get their votes so that they can get into office and do whatever they want to do. Now, San Francisco is the home of one of the most powerful Democrats in the entire country, Nancy Pelosi. Okay? She just turns a blind eye to what's going on in her own city. The mayor, Breed out there, finally, 6-8 months ago, came to the realization this is bad. And you know why they finally came to it? It wasn't because some of their heavily minority cities, parts of their cities were just overrun with crime and gangs and violence. It wasn't because, some of those, the working class neighborhoods were concerned about burglaries and break-ins. I've had reports from people that I know in California that now leave the car thefts and robberies out of cars has become so rampant that people are leaving doors open and trunks open because they would rather them rummage through whatever's in there than try to break the window and get in to rummage in it. It's just cheaper for them to leave the doors in the trunk open for these burglars to get into than to run the risk of them breaking the window or tearing up the lock on the trunk. That's just not sustainable. I don't care who you are, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, you want to be safe where you are living. And California right now is just living in a situation which is not tenable going forward. What broke my just complete resistance on this whole issue was, and frustration, and broke my train on this, was the issue was not even really addressed until they started these mass break-ins, these smash and grab robberies in San Francisco, went down to LA as well, but in San Francisco, of Louis Vuitton stores, Nordstrom stores, other stores that were all higher end retail stores. Now, nevertheless, the fact that stores like Walgreens, CVS, and others were closing on a regular basis. It's getting harder and harder to find drugs. The ones that were left open, can you imagine this? Ladies and gentlemen, as you're listening to this podcast, that you go to your local drugstore and every shelf in that drugstore, for the most part, has plexiglass over the top, and you have to get somebody to let you in to buy what you're asking for. That's the situation that's developed in San Francisco. This is the situation that's developing in LA, where I'm hoping that they'll get the final, 50,000, 60,000 signatures to recall Gascon, the DA down there in Los Angeles, because you're seeing the same things. We'll deal with Gascon maybe here in a little bit, but it's happening there. But to came to the position that now something had to be done when these high-end stores were finally being hit. They were the ones that were being the smash and grabs, your high-end stores. I guess where Mayor Breed and her friends actually shopped, that she decided that we had to actually do something about this. She never endorsed the recall effort, but she was very critical of voting the DA, and said now it's going to be up to her to find a new replacement for him as we go forward. But let me address this, and for some of you out there, and I said this on a TV interview the other day, because this is the right has taken this as an opportunity to begin to attack criminal justice reform. I want to put criminal justice reform in perspective on why this matters, again, for you to hear. Criminal justice reform, like the First Step Act, which I authored along with Hakeem Jeffries and others in the Senate and the House, got it passed. Donald Trump not only approved of it, he signed it into law, and it is making a difference in the lives of others. You've actually heard from Matthew Charles on this podcast, who talked about being the first one to be released from incarceration based on the First Step Act after he had served over 20 plus years for drug crimes. He said it better than I could ever say it. He said simply that criminal justice reform should be about the sentence and the punishment matching the crime that is taking place. So, in other words, you're not sentencing low-level drug users many times to decades in jail, and the realization that many of their dealers and others are getting off or they're never getting caught. This is the kind of thing that we're looking at. But there are other areas of criminal justice reform that matter and actually work. Number one, you have to have true criminal justice reform that involves a police force that is adequately equipped and adequately trained. They have to have enough personnel and they have to have the adequate training to do the jobs of interacting with their neighborhoods, instilling confidence in those that they're there to protect and serve, so that when things go wrong, when things go bad, then it's not a us against them mentality. If you don't believe how this can work, I'll show you examples all across the country of where before any issues happen, you have the police chief sitting down with neighborhood leaders, minority leaders, if there's different ethnic groups, and sitting down with them and saying, look, here's my number. A lot of times the chiefs of police and the sheriffs would give the local community, here's my phone number. Here's where you can call me if you're having issues with our officers or you're having issues in the community. Let me know. I'm willing to engage in this, and I'm willing to make sure that if something happened, a shooting happened, an officer involved issue happened, that it doesn't blow up into something that can't be solved, where if the officer is at fault, is being held accountable. The community is finding that the police are listening to them and that they're patrolling their neighborhoods fairly. That is part of criminal justice reform. And where you see that being done right, you see communities that are safer. You see communities that are coming together and being able to thrive. That is one step of criminal justice reform. It is not defund the police. It is not to get rid of the police and replace them with counselors. What the San Francisco DA is a living example of is that when you don't do your job and people are not safe, they will get rid of you. And they don't care how quickly it was. And we've seen this now in San Francisco, not only with the DA, but we saw it with the school board, where they took out 3, I believe, of the school board out there, mainly because that while the pandemic was raging and people were trying to get their kids into school and trying to get them educated, they were more worried about changing the names of schools that were deemed offensive because of whoever they were named for had a past that they didn't agree with. Now, they recalled them and they're moving forward. In fact, one of the recalled board members out there said that merit was racist. In other words, having merit, being able to earn your position, earn your job, was racist. That's how bad this is becoming in places like San Francisco. But back to this a notion from conservatives that are seeing this recall as a repudiation of, quote, criminal justice reform. I'm telling you right now, what Boudin and these others are doing is not real criminal justice reform. What is real criminal justice reform? Just like we talked about, you got to have the police that are active, involved, and able to know that their DAs and their prosecutors have their back, that when they make an actual case, that the prosecutors and district attorneys will do what they need to do to make sure that that case is adjudicated in a proper way. What else is being laid on the table here is not prosecuting crimes and saying we're just not going to prosecute crimes under a certain amount. Changing laws, and we've seen this in some states where they're lowering the threshold for felonies down to misdemeanors, and basically then the community prosecutors and law enforcement are just not going to prosecute the crimes. This has been seen in San Francisco. Boudin said he's not going to prosecute lifestyle crimes, such as which with drug possession, homelessness, other things and burglaries that were not going on. He just wasn't prosecuting them. He felt that the system was inherently biased against these individuals, so that what they did was inherently right. I mean, think about what he just said. This is the prosecutor who raised their hand, said that I swear to uphold not only the Constitution of the United States, but the Constitution of California, and to adequately provide the jobs that I've been elected to do. Namely, that you're going to be a prosecutor that actually prosecutes crime. They're not doing that. What can actually be done in communities like this? And what could we get together, both Republicans and Democrats, liberals and conservatives, come together and deal with criminal justice situations in our communities, and do so, though, in a way that not only provides safety to our communities, and not like what you've seen in San Francisco, where your murder rate 60% up, where your burglary rates, your violent crimes, all of these things are up. It shows you that when the police do not feel backed up, when they cannot arrest, or when they feel like it's not worth it anyway, and the criminals are emboldened because they know that the district attorneys are not going to prosecute these crimes, you see a total disaster happening in your community. So what can you do? Let's talk about the bail system. The big buzzword among liberals right now is eliminate cash bail. Well, in some ways, cash bail hasn't worked. I'll agree with in that. But when it's used properly, there's a way that you can use it along with other measures to make sure people show back up in court. And you're not just keeping people in jail because they can't afford a $1,000 bond. Those are issues that need to be addressed. But what you're looking at, too, is also screening these people who come up on a bond. We hear it all the time that somebody got out on bond or somebody got put out on their own recognizance, so they put up a small amount and went out and created another crime. And a lot of times when you look into it, what they had been charged with was a violent crime or something that they should have stayed in jail for until their case had gotten further down the line or adjudicated. This is the part that you're seeing in liberal DA's office. We saw this in Waukesha, Wisconsin, with the gentleman who drove the SUV through the parade. He should have never been out on the streets, not with his background. They did not follow the protocols on who should get bail and who should not get bail, and he was let out. And in the end, tragedy resulted. Did tragedy result simply because of a broken criminal justice system? Yes, in the fact that you had prosecutors who were not doing their job. They were not vetting, not looking, and not doing what needed to be done to keep their community safe and making sure that the assessment was done on the person's behavior, his past criminal history, his or her past criminal history, to determine if they were able to be let out. This is what actually happened. In many cases, we're seeing this come. So again, you got to find ways that we hold those that need to be held, find different alternatives for those that we can let out because we know that they're not going to hurt others or continue and to be held accountable. That's one way. The other way is accountability courts. And that is thinking, folks who have been caught for multiple DUIs, drug courts where they've been dealing and been caught for possession, and where drug addiction is their main problem. And they're simply using or maybe even selling at some point to feed their own addictions. These are courts in which you go into, and I've heard this described by some of my conservative colleagues, these are hug a thug programs. No, they're not. They go into it in the DUI courts in Georgia. If you receive the number 2 or more DUIs, you go into a DUI court program, which lasts for 2 years under probation, in which you have to go early on. You have to go every week, and then subsides as you get through the program. You have to go through coursework. You have to go on random drug tests and alcohol tests. You have to go keep a job. You have to pay your fines. You have to do all these things. And what we're seeing, and the goal of all these is to keep your recidivism rates down, because your recidivism rates are the very thing that we're trying to keep people out of the system. So why don't we use things that actually work? Drug courts, DUI courts, family violence courts, veterans courts that assess the needs of veterans, those members in mental health, family courts, to make sure that they get the treatments that they need, they get the help that they need, so they're not continually back in our court system. For those of us who have dealt in the criminal justice system, you know that a lot of the same folks, you see a lot of the same folks over and over and over again, especially if they're not underlying conditions or help. That's why we passed the First Step Act. That's why we were dealing in the federal system with those who have already been sentenced. They go through and are able to say, hey, I'm making a choice that if they meet the criteria for the program, that I want to get better so that when I get out, I'll have job skills, I'll have conquered addiction issues, I'll be able to handle anger management, I'll be able to handle my finances, I'll be able to get a GED, or I'll have job skills that so when I get back out, I can earn time to get out quicker through release program, but that when I get out, I'm not going to go back to the life of crime. And what we have seen is an amazing work so far in the recidivism rates are dropping tremendously for those who have been going through these programs in the First Step Act. Those who have been released under the First Step Act are not the cause of crime in this country, as been insinuated by even members of the United States Senate. That's just not true. The numbers do not back that up. So when we understand the problems in the criminal justice, when we understand, really what's going on, then we begin to be able to make the arrangements for it. That's why I'm so excited to see this event happen. I'm glad to see this recall. I'm pushing now for all the listeners out there in the Los Angeles area. If you're listening to this podcast, please sign the petition to recall Gascon as your district attorney. He has followed the same path, and you see the same problems in San Francisco that you're seeing in now that LA is seeing. And it's all because when you deal with issues that you are not capable of dealing with, in essence, you're basically not fixing the problem that you were elected to solve, then your cities are going to suffer, your people are going to suffer, and you are the ones that the ultimately cause of it. Don't be blaming everybody else, DAs, if you're not doing your job and your cities are being run over by crime. Best news of the election last week, recalled. San Francisco DA. Now it's time to recall the Los Angeles County DA. Before I go, though, there's a Sum of the Americas is getting ready to happen out in California. And it's going to highlight the issue of immigration. And I don't want to we're going to get in depth in immigration maybe in another broadcast and talk about the ins and outs of what's going on there, what's driving and why we're there. But I have to go back and really discuss immigration from a perspective of being on the Judiciary Committee, in which we had primary jurisdiction on immigration. Besides gun control, this was the area in which I find that liberals and Democrats in particular would rather pander to the problem than fix the problem. And I say that because as the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, I had the opportunity to serve as the head Republican who was willing to talk about immigration, legal immigration fixes, working with our immigrations so we can get our ag workers, we can get our guest program, we can get those legal work means so that we get the workers in that we need, but then they can go back home and they're not crowding our system. And also look at ways to fix illegal immigration. And there's multitudes of ways, from enforcement to the wall to everything there. But what we're seeing is that, and this is something that drew my attention, because here we're having another caravan. If you've been watching the news recently, there's another caravan heading to the United States. It started off in southern Mexico, many of them which coming from Venezuela. The other Central American countries are coming up. So timing it supposedly to get here for that Summit of Americas in the United States. But they're coming wanting entrance into the United States. They don't want to be held back. They want to get in. And the number is ranging from 6,000 to 15,000. This is a crisis that nobody's talking about. And it's sort of the hidden crisis, because it's not just folks who are coming across the border who are families who are just trying to feed their families. They're not just moms and kids and dads who are just trying to find a better life. In the mix of all of these that are coming across is folks who are not coming here for purposeful means. They're not coming here to find a job. They're not coming here to get their lives better. They're not coming here to do anything except cause trouble. And then you got the possibility, which we've known and have stopped, known terrorists on our terrorist watch list. These are not people that we just figured out are terrorists when they came across. They're on the watch list and are trying to enter through our southern border. A few statistics. Now, I want you to understand something. In April of 2020, less than 14,000 cross illegally. We were some of our lowest numbers. Donald Trump was president. Donald Trump had implemented plans to stay in Mexico policy, had been building the wall. They knew that immigrants coming across knew that they were not going to be able to stay, that they were going to be detained unless they could find a way around it. And the numbers were going down. This was a known thing. The policy of the federal government was not to encourage those who were coming here illegally to come. And it worked. I mean, I know that sounds shocking, but the wall works, and the enforcement works, because every one of these that we talk about getting stopped, there's some who get through that are not stopped. Well, that has turned tremendously here in the last little bit. And when 2019, let me go back for just a second. In 2019, you actually had 1.14 million people cross the border, and both Republicans and Democrats back in 2019 said this is a crisis. I remember going to the border. I was down there one night, and I was riding along with our Border Patrol agents. We were riding on the Rio Grande. We started off, there was 2 people at the checkpoint that were in custody for crossing illegally, and by the time we rode a little bit of a half-mile area of the Rio Grande River, there were about 200 that had crossed over. And many of them we were just directing to keep walking toward the agents so that they could be processed. Later that night, at that time, one of the largest caravans that he came through was over 1,000 people crossed about 3 or 4 miles from where I was staying that night. Democrats, Republican, everybody agreed. Now, there was disagreement because, of separating families and a lot of other issues that were coming along here. This was a very heightened event, but both Republicans and Democrats agreed that 1.14 million, that was a crisis. We were overloaded at the border. Now, in 2021, no call for crisis from Democrats. In fact, they don't even talk about it. Mayorkas, who ought to resign because he's not doing his job at the Department of Homeland Security, there were 1.9 million last year. And no calls from the media, no big press conferences on the border saying, we're going to stop this. No, they're just letting them in. And they're getting on. And I had a congressperson friend reiterated a story that I knew from back in 2019, is that when they're processed through, especially these families and others who are able to process through, they give them a manila envelope with paperwork coming through the border, and they have a sticker on supposedly where they have a relative or a family member or someone who's taking them in, and they put them on airplanes and they send them all around the country. And just as recently as last week, another member of Congress coming from the border was on a plane coming out of Texas area and was on the plane with many of those who had those little packages, and they were being sent all over the country, many of which will never find the immigration courts again. That is why this system is going. But 1.9 million, why did it spike last year? Because Joe Biden said we're not going to build the wall anymore. He stopped construction on the wall. He, in fact, basically started selling off the parts, even though we had already paid for the construction of that wall up to a certain point. He said we're not going to do it anymore, and basically opened the doors and just said, come on in. And that's exactly what happened. Title 42 going away. People are now coming in. The projection in 2022, you need to hear this, is almost 2 million plus. Now, before any of you get all upset and say, well, they're just coming, we got to be a compassionate nation, and this is refugees. And no, they're not. They're coming for economic reasons. They're not, many of them, yes, their own countries are shambles. Their own countries have economic problems. Their own countries have gang problems. But again, leaving those countries and coming to here is not a refugee issue. This is not something that it should be handled in that way. America is already one of the most generous countries when it comes to immigration. I'm going to say that again, because if you listen to the left and you listen to Democrats, you would say that we're turning away everybody. No, we're not. The numbers show we're not turning away everybody. In fact, the numbers show that it is getting worse by the day, and we have a new caravan coming in. The United States allows in well over 1 million people as citizens every year. We're the largest country in the world that does that. We're the most generous country in the world that allows that many people to become citizens of our country. We have a very generous worker program, H-2A, H-2B programs. We have, programs for, coming in and working in tourist and working in our entertainment industries. We have all of this that we have put in for years, most of which sometimes gets abused. I'm often reminded that, whatever number you want to use for how many illegals are in this country now at any given time, over half of them, the United States government actually gave them a piece of paper and said, hey, you can come for a student visa or a short-term visa, and people just overstay it because we have no way of tracking them. So if you wonder why this is a problem, then all you simply have to do is look to the Biden administration who said, look, we're not going to enforce the border. We're not going to build a wall. We're just going to send people all across the country. We're dispersing them out so that it's not a single point of focus on the border, whereas Donald Trump and his administration actually were stopping the border. And frankly, to a point, Obama's administration was as well. And there was this focal point for activists and everybody to go to the border and see these people being detained while they were being processed into the country or deported back out of the country. What the Biden administration has done is said, look, we're just not going to keep them on the border. We're going to send them out as quickly as we possibly can, get them out to agencies and other places. Folks, don't sleep on this one. I mean, we'll talk about it more here on the Doug Collins podcast, but immigration matters. A border matters. You don't go anywhere else in the world in which border and border control is not a part of a sovereign nation. And if we continue to keep this up, then we're in trouble because of the folks who are coming, the backgrounds in which they're coming from, and the job experiences and the needs that they bring with them. We're a very generous country. We're a loving and caring country, but you do it the right and proper way. Immigration should not be had simply walking across the border because you simply don't want to follow the rules. Think about all those folks, those 1 million plus people who do it right every year. How do you think they feel about someone who comes forward and is all of a sudden, in one of the discussions that the Democrats use all the time, is we'll just give amnesty, or we'll just say that if you were here from a certain time to a certain time, then you have a permanent green card. That's not changing the situation. That's just simply rewarding bad behavior. And what will happen is you'll have more and more people come. Why? And you can say to your blue in the face, well, we're not going to ever do this again. But they're not going to believe it, because if you once said you were going to do it, you may do it again. So, folks, a lot of things going on the social front, from criminal justice reform to immigration, a lot that I want to keep you informed of here. It's why you check back with us all the time here on the Doug Collins podcast. But again, good day for those of us who want true criminal justice reform in this country, true support for our police, true support for our prosecutors, making sure prison reform is something that is on the front burner. We had a victory this past week, and it was that the San Francisco DA was recalled. That's a good thing. See you again on the Doug Collins podcast. Hey, everybody. I just want to talk about sleep. You know why I want to talk about sleep? It's because I just got out from underneath my MyPillow bed sheets and my pillow that I keep under my head every night, because I like to sleep on my side. I like to sleep on my back. I like to sleep, I move at night, and my pillow is just the best thing that goes under my head. It keeps me getting restful sleep. The sheets are amazing. It's just what you need. Everybody understands you need 7 hours of sleep. Why not sleep in some of the best products out there? And Mike and the folks at MyPillow are great folks to do this with. And you can go to mypillow.com, or you can call them at 800-564-8475. Use code word Collins, Collins. You won't want to miss this. If you have not got these Giza bed sheets, you need them. They're amazing. They're soft. They don't wear out. You need those to get that sleep against your body at night and provide that cooling, just soothing nature that lets you get the most sleep. But they're not just about bed sheets and pillows. They also have the My Slippers. Amazing. I've talked to you about it before. I don't wear slippers, but I do wear My Slippers. They're amazingly comfortable. You can wear them outside. You can wear them inside. Great products. You've got towels. You've got all kinds of stuff. Go to mypillow.com. It's spring cleaning time. It's springtime to get out there and try and buy new things. Replace some of your old stuff. You'll want to replace your towels. Get some other products for your bedroom. All at mypillow.com. Mypillow.com, or call 800-564-8475. Use the promo code Collins, Collins, when you check out. I guarantee you will be satisfied.